So, hey guys, Chauzu here. So today I'm going to be talking about the stack buff and the potential it has going forward. But first, before we go into it, let's talk about the name because if you didn't notice, I did a poll on YouTube for the name. And the poll turned out to be real close. I had four options. It was like bubble buff, stack buff, lingering buff, and that you didn't like any of them. And the winner was actually that you didn't like any of them, which is fair. That just indicates that stack buff won't be the name it keeps forever. But it was the winner of the three options, so I will call it myself personally that. So I will use it until the community decides on another name, or if the community likes it, I'll just keep using it. We'll see. And the reason we call it stack buff is because we have a mechanic in the game called hunger, a debuff, that isn't on a turn timer. It's part of a stack mechanic. So basically, you can stall out hunger. You need to actively remove the stacks. And stack buffs are also not part of the turn timer system. So we just use an existing part of the game to give a name. And some of the stack buffs you can actually stack, like in Jinbe's. It doesn't look like you can stack Boa though. I did play around with her a bit before the reset. I was actually going to do a video with Boa, but then the maintenance happened, and yeah, I decided to do this instead. I had a plan to make this anyway, so. Anyway, let's talk about how the stack back buff works. Basically, you keep a buff indefinitely until something happens. So to illustrate this, we can use the two current examples. First, we have Weed Tree Jinbe, and in his captain ability, you automatically get a damage immunity that you keep until you take any damage. It can be the enemy attacking you if you stall. It can be the enemy doing a preemptive HP cut. It can be the enemy doing death damage. Any of those, you take damage. You don't take any. Well, they attack you, you don't take any damage because of the damage immunity, but it removes the stack buff. And Jinbe can actually stack it, so if you run double Jinbe, you get 2 of the damage immunity to make use of. With Fire Boa, can't be stacked from what I can see, but basically you keep a 2.5 times attack boost until your HP decreases by 3000. And I think Boa is the best showcase of this mechanic so far. I only played around with her a little bit so far, but the mechanic is absolutely busted. Like, you can potentially keep the buff forever. Depends on the enemy in this case. We'll get back to that. But yeah, both of these are based around taking damage in some sort, but the mechanic have a lot more potential than that. I do want to note that so far, these two mechanics of Jinbe and Boa have different icons, and I said only Jinbe's can be stacked, but I feel like they are basically the same in function that I don't know why Bandai are making it murky with them looking different. So we'll see how it goes in the future. It will be weird if we keep mechanics like this and they keep making new icons or something. Like, we'll see how it works out. Anyway, let's talk about the potential for the different types of stack buffs. We've talked about Jinbe and Boa so far, the only two existing stack buffs in the game. And I'd say that both of them are enemy controlled stack buffs. So basically what I mean by this is that you don't really have all of the control if you get to keep the stack buff or not. It depends on what the enemy does. Because as we said, here it's about taking damage, and sure, you have some control of that. You can avoid to stall, you can try and speedrun, stuff like that. But if you get to stage 4 and they do a 30% HP cut, that's it. You can't do anything about that. You can't stop that in any way. That's why the enemy controls it. So this is obviously, like if we take Boa for an example, like for Jinbe, it's like perfect design. Jinbe has his issues, but him getting his damage immunity removed when taking damage, it makes perfect sense with the type of legend he is. For Boa, it's a bigger issue because, like, imagine getting to stage 4 of an arena and they, like, remove your buffs. That, like, means you can't use stage 3. you have to use a stage 4, maybe stage 5 delete buffs, and suddenly Boa doesn't have a real stack buff because she can't keep it between stages, which is like the big cool thing of this mechanic. Anyway, here's some ideas for future variations of enemy controlled stack buffs, and I struggled a bit with this. I don't really see a lot of potential with this. I think taking damage is the most obvious one, but it could be that you keep a buff until the enemy applies a debuff. Maybe a specific debuff or some kind of debuff. It can also be like they could do something like you have immunity to all debuffs until the enemy tries to apply it. Then you ignore it, and then the stack buff is gone. Could be a cool captain ability or something. They can also do something with full immunity, basically that you apply an automatic conditional or something until it can't be applied, like the enemy has a full immunity, basically. It can also be if the enemy has revive or not, like it can be... We'll get back to this, but basically like if they do something like if you keep killing an enemy every turn, but then the enemy can just say, yeah, we're just going to revive, so you can't kill an enemy this turn. That will also screw it up a bit. Worth noting here is that if the enemy tries to remove buffs, the stack buffs will be removed. Anyway, let's go into the more interesting part, which is what I call the self-control stack buffs. This doesn't exist yet in the game, but this definitely has potential in the future. I could see this happen in UV already, like there's some wild potential they can do with this type of a buff. But basically, in this situation, you will have basically full control if you keep a stack buff or not. It doesn't really matter what the enemy does. Of course, they can delete buffs, and that will suck. We can get back to that later. But here's some ideas I have for potential self-control stack buffs, where you yourself have the control on if you want to keep it or not. So one thing, which is the most straightforward and I think potentially the most powerful, is that you keep the buff if you defeat a stage every turn. So as long as you don't stall, you keep a strong buff. And of course, if you keep a strong buff, it's easier to not have to stall. So really good synergy, and I can see a really broken legend using a mechanic like this. Alternatively, you can change it to defeat an enemy every turn. This opens up to some potential stall as well in certain situations, but basically the same. Another variant would be that you can keep a buff if you use a certain number of specials every turn. And this could be very cool on a future legend that is similar to like the Sobo Mask legend, where you can use the special repeatedly. Maybe on future uses it has a different mechanic, like the first time you use it, you give a stack buff, like attack boost, orb boost or something. And then in the future you maybe do some orb control, maybe a different buff, chain buff, something like that. Could have a lot of potential like that. Another potential self-control stack buff is that you keep the buff until you use a certain number of specials. So maybe use this buff, but after you've used 5 specials, the buff is removed, or it will be removed the turn after, something like that. Could also be really strong and pretty interesting to play around with. Will really encourage playing around with supports and stuff. Another thing will be that you keep it until you consumed a certain number of orbs. I could think that also could be really powerful, especially on like speedrun legends when you can avoid using orbs by using wave clear specials and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that also has a lot of cool potential. Another one could be that you keep a stack buff, or as long as you do a certain amount of damage every turn. It will be pretty similar to using a unit like the Arena Mihawk, where you basically have... You can keep spamming a chain lock as long as you do enough damage. So that's basically that. It's just that it will obviously be easier to do a lot of damage if you have, say, a 2.5 times attack boost permanently, like Wi-Fi Boa has, for example. But yeah, that's just some ideas I have. Like, there's a lot more potential for self-control stack buffs. They can do a lot more than this for sure. But yeah, even here, the enemies could just delete your buffs and remove it. It is what it is. I want to note though that if they ever do a versus special that includes a stack buff, that will be pretty insane since versus specials cannot be deleted by enemies. So imagine a versus special with a stack buff that you control. Like that will be super cool. I really hope to do something like that in the future. We'll see if versus Legends return or not this new year, but yeah, I think it's worth noting at least. Finally, my final take on the stack buff so far, and as I say here, I think it's going to be the big mechanic of next year, 2023. As I say here, stack buff, it's in general superior to the classic turn buff because there are really few situations. Like it depends on the buff. Like if you take a 3-turn buff, for example, sure. If something happens that removes your buff, stack buff can potentially be a 1-turn buff instead of 3 or 5 or 7, whatever. But in most cases, stack buff will just be better since it can be so many turns and the enemy has nothing to say about it. It also depends on the type of buff. I'd say that buffs like timer or hitting perfects and get a new buff are also good because they do avoid stuff like enemy deleting buffs, as we've already discussed, since that will remove stack buffs as is today. And yeah, as said, we already have 2 legends with this mechanic, and it's not even 2 weeks old. It's like the 2 most recent legends, and they use it in a bit different ways, and it has so much potential, so they can do so much with it. And I've already used Wi-Fi Boa a little bit, but she's so incredibly strong. Like, so far I just tried to make a no-stall team versus Doffer 2, and I must say it's a joke. It's the easiest no-stall team I've ever done. It's like it feels like cheating, like when you use Roger Whitebeard. It's just dumb in a fun way. Like that's the most important for me. Like I'm fine with things being dumb as long as it's fun. And yeah, but I can easily make some of the strongest legs in the game here. Like, just imagine they drop like a new Roger Whitebeard for New Year, like a legend hype as them, and it's like, oh, as long as you kill all enemies every turn, you get to keep a 2.5 times attack boost and ore boost, something like that. Stupid. Like, who knows? They could easily do that, and it will just destroy everything. Just saying. But yeah, for me, the most important thing is that they keep making the mechanic and keep making new interesting stuff with it. I think Jinbe was a great start. Boa showcases like the big damage dealing potential of it, and we'll see what the future brings. But I'm just super hyped. I want more of this. It's just too fun. But yeah, expect a showcase for Wi-Fi Boa tomorrow. I'll probably do a no-stall speedrun for both Doffer 2 and Revo 2. Like, I'm not really thought about Revo 2 team yet, but I can't see Boa not being able to speedrun that. That would be very weird, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.